The first thing I noticed after marriage was that my new home was nothing like the quiet, comforting place I had once imagined. Instead, the house always felt restless, almost as if peace had deliberately left it behind. It wasn't a large family, just my husband and me, his younger brother and his wife, their only sister, and their father. But somehow, that small group was enough for the walls to echo with tensions and unspoken grievances. I used to think perhaps it was just a phase, a passing discomfort that would eventually settle as I found my footing in their lives. But as days turned to months, I realized the real trouble ran much deeper. What struck me as most bizarre was the way my father-in-law carried himself. He was nearing 60, his hair already streaked with gray, yet he dressed like a young man and acted with a flamboyance that belonged to someone less than half his age. I would often see him singing loud, outdated songs with abandon, his voice filling every corner of the house. He wore flashy, youthful clothes, tight trousers, bright shirts, even the kind of sunglasses teenage boys liked. The first time I saw him getting ready to leave the house, hair slicked back and perfume clouding the air, I could hardly believe he was the patriarch of this family. But what truly disturbed me was the attention he gave my co-sister. The moment he stepped through the door, he would call out for her, never for me or his own daughter. My co-sister, too, responded eagerly to his summons, rushing to his side with a zeal I found unsettling. She was always ready for him, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup thick and bold, her clothes more fitted and colorful than any newlywed would usually dare to wear under her in-laws' roof. The way she hovered around him, always looking for his approval, made me feel invisible. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how quietly I carried out my chores, it seemed I would never matter to him the way she did. I tried to brush it off in the beginning. Perhaps he felt closer to her. Perhaps she reminded him of someone from his youth, or maybe she was simply better at winning people over. But then, his partiality began to sting. Whenever there was a family matter, he asked for her opinion. When he needed tea, it was she who was called. He never noticed the food I cooked, nor the care I put into keeping his house running smoothly. The only time he ever addressed me was to ask where his favorite was. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. After all, I was the eldest daughter-in-law, the one expected to be the pillar of the family, yet I was being treated like furniture, seen but never valued. Sometimes I caught myself feeling a sharp twinge of jealousy, though I quickly chastised myself for it. But every evening, as I watched my co-sister parade around the courtyard in anticipation of his return, my mind filled with questions I didn't dare speak aloud. Why was she so eager to please him? What did she gain from this affection? And why, in a house filled with so much noise, did I feel lonelier than ever? Time and again, I tried to rationalize the strange dynamics of the house, telling myself I was overthinking. But every day seemed to confirm my unease. My father-in-law's favoritism towards my co-sister was never subtle. It became more apparent with every little interaction. No matter how insignificant the task, he wanted only her. If the doorbell rang, she was the one to answer. If his shirt needed pressing, she was called. Even in front of the rest of us, he openly praised her beauty, her cooking, her laughter. It was as if she was a dazzling centerpiece in his otherwise ordinary world. Meanwhile, my own presence faded into the background. My responsibilities grew heavier: cooking, cleaning, tending to the children, handling the endless chores that came with managing a household. Yet nothing I did seemed to catch his attention. He never once complimented my efforts. Sometimes, in my weakest moments, I wondered what it would take for him to see me, not just as another pair of hands in the kitchen, but as a person deserving of warmth and respect. This invisible barrier between us became more pronounced during family gatherings. Whenever relatives or neighbors visited, he would boast about his younger daughter-in-law, listing her virtues as if reciting a poem. I was mentioned only as an afterthought, if at all. Even his daughter, the quiet one who mostly kept to herself, received more affection than I did. I started to resent not just his treatment, but the entire atmosphere of the house that seemed to revolve around one person's charm. In truth, I felt cheated, robbed of the status I thought would be mine as the eldest daughter-in-law. I remembered my own mother's stories, how she was respected in her marital home, treated as a leader among women. I had dreamed of having the same, of being looked up to, my opinion sought, my voice heard. Instead, I found myself yearning for scraps of recognition, while my co-sister glided through the house, wrapped in the confidence that comes from being adored. There were times when I tried to win some of that affection for myself. I would offer to help my father-in-law, bringing him his tea or fetching his newspaper. But he would barely glance at me, often dismissing me with a wave of his hand and asking me to send his favorite instead. Each time, my hope would shrink a little more, replaced by a quiet humiliation I tried to hide from everyone else. My husband noticed my unease, though he never fully understood it. When I mentioned my feelings, he would simply pull me close, telling me to forget everyone else and focus on our own happiness. He loved me deeply, and his arms were always a refuge from the coldness I felt in the rest of the house. Still, I couldn't help but crave something more. A sense of belonging, a place in this family that felt rightfully mine. The yearning didn't go away, no matter how much I tried to silence it. Every night, as the lights dimmed and quiet fell over the household, my mind would replay the day's events. I wondered if I was at fault for not being lively enough, for not dressing in brighter colors, or for not seeking his approval the way my co-sister did. But then I'd remember all the effort I poured into this home, and the longing would give way to a steely resolve. One day, I promised myself, I would find out why things were the way they were, and I would reclaim my place, no matter what it took. The quarrels between my co-sister and her husband became routine. Almost every night, their voices would rise behind closed doors, harsh words flying back and forth. Sometimes I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to shield myself and my children from the relentless arguments. My husband, tired of my concern, told me again and again, let them fight. It's not our problem, just look after me and our children. But ignoring it was impossible. Their shouting seeped through the thin walls, disturbing everyone's sleep. There were nights when I wondered if I should intervene, try to bring some peace, but my husband's warnings echoed in my mind. Still, my curiosity grew. I worried about the effect this toxic atmosphere was having on my young children. I wanted to know what was really happening, why my co-sister was always so angry with her husband, and why every argument ended the same way. That night, the pattern repeated itself. Their fight seemed even more intense than usual. Suddenly, silence fell. I guessed, as always, my co-sister had stormed out. I stepped out of my room, intending to find her and talk to her gently, hoping to ease her bitterness for the sake of my children. Instead, I saw her quietly slipping into the father-in-law's room. It wasn't the first time. Too often, even in the middle of the night, I'd seen her head straight to his door after a fight. She was the only one who could walk in and out of his room at any hour without fear or shame. I wondered if she went to complain about her husband, or if there was something else, something I didn't dare name, between them. Whatever it was, the next morning always seemed to reset everything. She'd return to her room, and by breakfast, both she and her husband acted as if nothing had happened. The same couple that kept us awake all night with their shouting would be calmly sitting together, sharing bread and tea, their anger replaced by a strange calm. But beneath the surface, I sensed the tension thickening. The more I watched, the more I noticed how carefully my co-sister played her role, crying one minute, then seeking comfort with my father-in-law the next. I started to realize that in this house, every relationship was tangled in secrets, and nothing was ever as simple as it appeared. The next morning, as usual, everything seemed deceptively normal. My co-sister sat at the breakfast table, a faint smile on her face, as if the shouting match from the night before had never happened. Her husband, too, acted as though nothing had passed between them. It was as if the walls themselves had erased every harsh word, but for me, the restlessness lingered. I watched her carefully, noticing how she avoided eye contact with me and answered every question with cold indifference. Trying to make sense of it all, I attempted to speak to her while working in the kitchen. "What happened last night?" I asked, my tone gentle but curious. She looked up, her eyes guarded. "It's between husband and wife. Please don't interfere." The finality in her words silenced me, and I realized she would never share anything unless she wanted to. Her sharp replies, her insistence on privacy, they all pointed to something deeper, something she was determined to keep hidden. Our unmarried sister-in-law, who was older and still waiting for a suitable match, also felt the sting of the younger daughter-in-law's tongue. One morning, she dared to ask why the nightly fights happened, only to be met with a harsh rebuke. "Why don't you get married quickly and go to your own home?" the co-sister snapped. The words stung. Our sister-in-law's eyes filled with tears. She was already sensitive about being unmarried at 28. This humiliation added a new layer to her pain. Watching her retreat to her room in silent misery, I felt helpless. Later, I tried to comfort her. Don't mind her words, she's just sharp-tongued. My sister-in-law only shook her head, unable to hide her hurt. It's not my fault I haven't found a match, she whispered before closing the door behind her. That evening, I shared the incident with my husband. He became agitated, scolding me for getting involved. Let them handle their own issues. As for my sister, when I have enough money, I'll arrange her marriage. She's still just a girl in my eyes. I realized then that in this house, every person was burdened by their own struggles, but no one truly reached out to the other. My husband cared little for the daily dramas or the emotional wounds festering within the family. Through it all, my father-in-law remained unchanged, lost in his own world, dyeing his hair, choosing outlandish clothes, carrying himself with the energy of a man half his age. The mother-in-law had been gone for years, but it seemed her absence only gave him more reason to play this role, always seeking admiration and attention. My co-sister stayed at the center of his universe, while everyone else learned to keep their distance. Each day, the feeling of unease in the house deepened. I felt trapped between the roles of peacemaker and silent observer, unsure how much longer this balance could last or what secret would emerge next to disrupt our uneasy peace. As time passed, I found myself increasingly drawn into the pain and confusion swirling through our home. My children were growing up, no longer oblivious to the nightly clashes or the cold silences that filled our days. I worried for them, worried that the bitterness and chaos might seep into their young hearts, coloring their understanding of family. Yet whenever I tried to talk about these things with my husband, he dismissed my concerns. Just keep the children in your room and mind your own business, he repeated, his patience wearing thin. Keeping them shut away from the world outside our bedroom was becoming impossible, but I did my best, hoping I could at least protect them from the worst of it. For a couple of days, the house felt quieter, as if everyone was trying to recover from the previous turmoil, but peace was always short-lived. On the third night, the same familiar sounds erupted again, shouting, accusations, sobs. This time, the fight was even more vicious. I heard my co-sister's voice rise above the rest, trembling with anger and desperation. If you couldn't give me anything, why did you marry me? You've ruined my life. If I had known you were incapable, I would never have agreed to this marriage. Her words cut through the night, landing like blows. The realization hit me with a chill. It had been nearly 3 years since their wedding, and still, they had no children. Until now, I had assumed their constant arguments were rooted in small misunderstandings or unmet expectations. But tonight, I understood the truth behind her pain. Her husband, my brother-in-law, could not fulfill her as a partner. Her frustration, her sharpness, her emotional outbursts suddenly made sense. She was trapped in a marriage that offered her no intimacy, no hope for a family of her own, yet despite the harsh things she said, something never quite added up. Each morning after these battles, she emerged from her room radiant and composed, her hair still damp from an early bath, her makeup flawless. I wondered how she managed to present herself this way, as if the misery of the night before hadn't touched her at all. The contradiction was baffling. If she truly felt deprived and unloved, why did she look so alive each day? The thought haunted me for days. I started to see my co-sister in a new light, not only as someone sharp-tongued and privileged in the eyes of our father-in-law, but as a woman wrestling with her own unmet needs and disappointments. Perhaps I thought her nightly visits to my father-in-law's room weren't only about seeking comfort or advice. Perhaps there was a deeper, more complicated bond between them, one that explained her ability to carry on with such unnatural poise. In those days, I realized how little I truly understood about the people I lived with. Each of us was hiding something behind closed doors, surviving in the shadows of our own secrets and pain. I wondered, more than ever, what the real story was behind my co-sister's strange strength, and what might happen if those secrets ever came to light. The more I tried to make sense of my co-sister's behavior, the more restless I became. Her ability to put on a brave face each morning while her marriage remained empty kept nagging at my thoughts. Questions swirled in my mind. How had she spent 3 years with a husband who could not give her happiness? Why did she never speak of her struggles except in moments of anger? And above all, why did she keep seeking refuge with my father-in-law, especially during the night? One evening, as I finished tucking my children into bed, I heard the now familiar argument erupt between the younger couple. The words grew sharper, the accusations more personal. When the shouting finally died down, I listened for the sound I had come to expect. My co-sister's footsteps moving quietly through the house, pausing only at my father-in-law's door. I watched from a distance, torn between worry and suspicion, as she slipped inside without hesitation. I lay awake for hours that night, thoughts churning. Was she truly so desperate for comfort that she turned to her husband's father? Or was there another reason she clung to that room, one I didn't dare admit to myself? My husband's warnings rang in my ears, telling me to stay out of family matters, but I couldn't quiet my conscience anymore. The strange bond between my co-sister and father-in-law had become too obvious to ignore. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, busy as ever. Her eyes were calm, her face untroubled. I almost asked her outright about the night before, but stopped myself at the last moment. Instead, I observed her closely, searching for any sign of regret or guilt. There was none. She prepared breakfast with her usual briskness, moving around the house as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Later that day, Nagma, our unmarried sister-in-law, approached me with her own worries. "Why does she always fight with my brother, then spend all night with father?" she whispered, her eyes wide with confusion. I shook my head, unable to answer. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I was just as lost as she was, and that every day brought new doubts about what was happening behind closed doors. I began to watch my co-sister and father-in-law even more closely, hoping to catch some clue that would explain everything. But she was clever. Around me, she spoke little and kept her distance. Only with her husband did the fights continue, loud and bitter as ever. After each argument, she would vanish into my father-in-law's room, sometimes staying there for hours. It became clear to me that their connection was not simply one of comfort or guidance. There was something else binding them together, something that made me afraid for what would happen if the truth ever came out. Despite the tension, I kept my suspicions to myself. I needed proof before I could say anything to my husband or the rest of the family. I realized that in this home, appearances were everything. One wrong step could shatter the fragile peace we all clung to. So I waited, knowing that sooner or later the truth would reveal itself, whether we were ready for it or not. That night, my patience finally broke. I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal while so many disturbing questions haunted my mind. My co-sister's long secret visits to my father-in-law's room had gone beyond what anyone could reasonably explain away as comfort-seeking. I needed to know the truth, not just for myself, but for my children and for the peace of our home. I waited for the house to grow quiet. After dinner, my father-in-law retired to his room as usual, and soon after, my co-sister slipped away from her own heated argument and followed. I pretended to be busy in my room, but my heart was racing. After some time, when the house had settled into silence, I quietly made my way to the roof. There was a small old ventilator that opened above my father-in-law's room, a relic from years past, meant to let the breeze in during summer. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but tonight, I crouched by it, holding my breath, determined to see for myself what was really going on. Peering down through the opening, I saw the two of them together. My co-sister was kneeling by my father-in-law's feet, pressing them gently as she spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Your son can't give me anything. My future is ruined. If you didn't support me, I would have left this house long ago." Her words made my blood run cold. The reality was even more twisted than I'd feared. My father-in-law stroked her head and whispered promises of protection, telling her not to worry, that with him by her side, new stories. She claimed I was a greedy woman who manipulated my husband, that I wanted to drive her out of the family, that I was the real threat in the house. She pleaded with my father-in-law to keep the truth between them, warning him that I would steal everything if given the chance. The words stung, but they also hardened my resolve. I realized she wasn't just desperate, she was cunning, using every tool she had to secure her future. I watched as my father-in-law handed her a bundle of jewelry. "This belonged to my late wife. I was saving it for Nagma's wedding, but you should keep it safe for now. When the time comes, you can give it to her yourself." My co-sister agreed eagerly, assuring him that she would look after Nagma's interests, but only if I was kept away from everything. My heart pounded as I pulled away from the ventilator, unable to watch any longer. Everything I had suspected was true. Their secret alliance wasn't about comfort, it was about power, greed, and manipulation. My co-sister had turned the family's weaknesses into her advantage, weaving lies and playing victims to win my father-in-law's sympathy and trust. I knew now that the peace in our home was an illusion, fragile and ready to break, but I also knew that I could no longer remain silent. The truth was ugly, but it was finally in my hands. All night, I struggled to sleep, replaying every word and gesture I had witnessed. The revelation pressed on my chest like a weight. I could no longer bear to keep this knowledge to myself. My co-sister's schemes had gone too far, endangering not just the harmony of our home, but also the future of everyone living in it. By morning, my mind was made up. I would tell my husband the truth, no matter the cost. At breakfast, I watched as my co-sister and father-in-law acted out their familiar routine, her asking him with a sweet voice what he'd like for lunch, him handing her money with a smile, both ignoring everyone else at the table. Nagma sat quietly, her face drawn with sadness. The tension in the room was palpable, but only I knew the storm that was about to break. Once I found a moment alone with my husband, I told him everything, what I had seen, what I had heard, and how the family's future was being gambled away in secret deals. For a moment, he was silent, the shock clear on his face. Then, as my words sank in, I saw anger rise in his eyes, not just at his brother's impotence or his father's blindness, but at how thoroughly his family was being manipulated. He wasted no time. That evening, he called his father and brother into the living room. My co-sister was summoned too, and for the first time, the entire family sat together with every pretense stripped away. My husband confronted his father, demanding to know why the house was being given away in secret and why family jewels were being handed over without anyone else's knowledge. My brother-in-law sat quietly, no longer surprised by his wife's cunning. Perhaps he had suspected for a long time but never dared to speak. My father-in-law was defensive at first, insisting he was only looking after the one person who truly cared for him. My co-sister played her part to perfection, tears flowing, voice trembling as she claimed she was the real victim, always neglected and mistreated by everyone except him. But my husband pressed on, laying out all the facts, recounting her accusations, her late-night visits, the manipulation, the lies. It was a painful confrontation, voices raised and tempers flaring, but at last the truth began to dawn on my father-in-law. He looked at his son, saw the disappointment in his eyes, and realized how far things had spiraled out of control. The reality was undeniable. In trying to comfort one family member, he had nearly destroyed the entire household. The weight of the truth hung in the air, leaving everyone stunned. That night, our home was quieter than it had ever been. My co-sister no longer strutted with the confidence she once had. The illusions had been shattered, and nothing could be the same again. Yet beneath the pain, I sensed a strange relief. Finally, the secrets had come to light, and the healing, however difficult, could begin. After that tumultuous night, the atmosphere in our house changed entirely. My co-sister, stripped of her secrecy and false innocence, no longer walked with the same confidence. She kept to her room, barely speaking to anyone. The father-in-law, now aware of how his misplaced trust had hurt everyone, seemed older and tired, his playful energy drained by regret and shame. Even Nagma, who had always tried to stay invisible, felt the difference. For the first time, her father began to acknowledge her presence, perhaps realizing how much she had been overlooked. My husband took charge of resolving the chaos. He spoke to his father, firmly but with respect, explaining that the only way forward was to make things right and restore fairness to the family. After much discussion, the father-in-law agreed to divide the house properly, giving each son his rightful share and ensuring Nagma would receive the family jewelry that had always been meant for her wedding. The documents that my co-sister had held so tightly were returned, the jewelry retrieved and placed back in safe hands. Realizing her game was over and that she would never control the household as she'd planned, my co-sister quietly began packing her things. She had never cared for her husband, only for the security and advantages she thought she could win. Now, with her schemes revealed, she decided to leave. There was no drama, just a tired acceptance on all sides. My brother-in-law watched her go with a blank expression, as if he too had finally run out of hope. As the door closed behind her, a strange calm settled in our home. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful rather than oppressive. We were battered but finally honest with one another, the poisonous secrets finally exposed. Looking at my children and at Nagma, who allowed herself a small, hopeful smile, I realized we all had a chance to heal, and perhaps one day to be a real family again. In the days that followed, our home gradually began to breathe again. The constant tension had lifted, replaced by a gentler routine. My father-in-law, once so obsessed with appearances and fleeting admiration, became quieter and more withdrawn. I could see regret in his eyes whenever he looked at Nagma or at my husband. He tried to make amends in small ways, a kind word here, a thoughtful gesture there, slowly attempting to rebuild the trust he had so carelessly fractured. My brother-in-law, free from the manipulations that had defined his marriage, seemed lighter but also deeply wounded. He threw himself into work, spending long hours away from the house as if trying to escape the shadows of the past. Nagma, now the rightful owner of her late mother's jewelry, began to hope again for her own future. My husband, meanwhile, stood taller, his quiet strength guiding our family through the aftermath. For the first time, he truly spoke with his sister and offered his support, promising to help her find happiness in her own life. As for me, I discovered a new sense of peace. The gnawing jealousy and insecurity I'd carried for years faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I realized that sometimes protecting your family means confronting the ugliest truths, even when it feels easier to stay silent. I also learned that envy, suspicion, and bitterness can poison a home as surely as any outsider's malice. It is only through honesty, however painful, that a family can begin to heal. The house itself seemed to settle, its walls no longer echoing with fights and secrets. Laughter returned in small moments. My children playing together, Nagma humming as she worked, my husband sharing stories over dinner. Life was still far from perfect, but it felt real and earned. Some relationships, I understood at last, are meant only to teach us how strong we can be in the face of betrayal and disappointment. And so, our story moved forward, not as a perfect family, but as people who had faced their pain, spoken their truths, and chosen against all odds to begin again.